Hello and welcome to Stretford Paddock. My name is Joe and we are once again joined for a transfer special by Sky Sports reporter Dharmesh, Sheth, and friend of the channel at this point, I'd say. Dharmesh, how are you?
Very much so, yes. Good to be back. Starting to heat up a little bit. Hope everything's well your end. Enjoying the Euros.
I'm enjoying
England,
everything. And then it is starting to heat
and all
up, especially with Man United. Like there's actually loads going on. We've got new sporting directors, we've got new coaches, we've got, on the verge maybe or on the cusp of some new players as well by the sound of things.
Yeah.
So let's just get straight into this. Matthijs De Ligt, who's been linked with Man United for 4 or 5 years now, even back when he was at Ajax, he was linked to Manchester United, I remember. It now looks as though there is a genuine chance of United signing him. The reports in the last few days from Sky, I think your colleague Florian Plettenberg over in Germany as well, that Bayern want 50 million euros plus add-ons. There is even rumours elsewhere of personal terms being agreed. What is the latest on this deal with Matthijs De Ligt and Manchester United? Because it does seem to have sort of come out of nowhere, and all of a sudden, it seems like it's almost fully formed.
Yeah, it's clear that centre-back, we've been mentioning it here in the past couple of times I've been on, is a big priority, if not the biggest priority for Manchester United in this summer's transfer window. Matthijs De Ligt is the latest player that they're interested in. Now, the information I have is that United have opened early initial talks with Bayern Munich just to explore the conditions of a deal. And as you mentioned, we think that Bayern Munich now, they're asking for 50 million euros plus performance-related add-ons. So that would probably be the starting point. Whether United would go to that price is a different matter. It's one of those ones where that's probably where Bayern would want to open negotiations. United probably wouldn't go straight in with 50 million euros plus performance-related add-ons. They'll probably go a little bit lower once, if and when they do make that bid. But it is clear that the interest is there. It is clear that, it is a player that Erik ten Hag, of course, has worked with in the past. So, and I think this, the alternatives, if for want of a better word, to Jarrad Branthwaite is basically the Branthwaite situation is effectively kicking other alternatives on. And with the Branthwaite situation, we know that there was that interest. We know that the £40 million bid went in. We know that that was effectively laughed out. Everton wanting £70 million plus as their asking price. But they've since made a couple of important deals that, could have helped them out with regard to profit and sustainability rules. They sold Lewis Dobbin to Aston Villa and they sold Ben Godfrey to Atalanta. And we think that those two deals have put them in a good position with regard to some of their bigger name players, in that they're not under pressure to compromise on a price on Jarrad Branthwaite. They're not under pressure to sell, and they've maintained all along they do not want to sell Jarrad Branthwaite. So from the outset now, it looks like that the De Ligt one is advancing a little bit further than Branthwaite. You can never say never with Branthwaite, but at the prices being quoted, I don't think United would want to do business at that price.
Yeah, it does seem that you're getting a very much an unproven player for a lot more money than someone like De Ligt, who, I know he's got his injury record isn't amazing, but you're getting a proven player who's been around some of the top clubs in Europe for, not half the price, but 20, 30 million less than you might get for Branthwaite. Just on that injury record, it seemed as though, I think it's maybe slightly overblown, this sort of, all these injuries he has, when actually, other than last season, he's played 40 games in the 2 seasons before that, and then I think high 30s before that, and 55 when he was at Ajax. Is that something United are concerned with, do you think? Do you think we're looking into that? It's obviously something that must be being considered by United.
They'd be foolish not to, given all the injuries that they've had last season, particularly in the centre-back positions, because that was incredible, the number of injuries that Manchester United had. And I think I mentioned it here before. I think it's something like 15 centre-back partnerships. Yeah. They don't want to be in a position where they're going to be signing players who have bad injury records. But as you mentioned, I know people always look at it most recently. It's only really been last season, and he still made a number of appearances last season. Yes, he's had that injury that's effectively ruled him out of the Euros with the Netherlands. But do you know what? it's one of those situations where, of course, a club is going to have to look at a situation like that. And especially because, in the past, United have signed someone like Raphael Varane, and even then it was pointed out to people, look, his injury record isn't great. Oh, it could be different at United, and it didn't prove to be the case. This time, I think you're only looking at one season, as you mentioned. Last season, he's been pretty regular and been playing pretty regular high-level football for the previous seasons before. So, of course, it will be something that United will take into consideration. Whether it would be the tipping point on whether they went through with a deal or not, I'm not so sure, only because, as we mentioned, it's only been that last season.
Yeah, just in terms of personal terms and whether the players into this, one thing that United have had under Ten Hag, obviously, we're all scarred by that Frankie de Jong chase. And obviously, these are two different people, two different situations in their careers. But does De Ligt fancy this, do you think? Is there are you hearing that, the player is up for this move?
The noises we're getting is that he would be.
Okay.
And if you look at the Bayern Munich situation, it doesn't look like he's going to be part of their plans because they're already recruiting in the central defensive area. So he looks like he's going to be the odd man out. And, they bought him, for over £60 million. So for the valuation to come down by that as the first step of negotiation, you'd expect that to go even lower when a club comes in and begins to negotiate. Then you'd probably think that, it's over for him at Bayern Munich. They've got a new manager in Vincent Kompany, may want to go in a different way. So it could be an opportunity that Manchester United are looking at and thinking, this is an area we do need to strengthen, and getting a player of his ability and his experience at that price, it could prove to be a no-brainer. But look, still plenty of work to do on the deal, not least trying to agree a deal with Bayern Munich, not least then trying to agree personal terms with De Ligt and his representatives. I know you hear all sorts of reports that, personal terms are done. If you're looking at it very strictly, United can't actually agree personal terms until they've agreed a deal with the club. So on that note, you just have to say that if they're doing it in the way that you're supposed to do a transfer, they need to sort everything out with Bayern Munich first of all. But we always hear of this. If Manchester United and other clubs will never go for a player if they weren't getting some sort of indication that the player wanted to join. There's no point going and trying to discuss with Bayern Munich for 2 or 3 weeks and then 1 minute after the player saying, well, actually, I don't want to join. They must have got some kind of indication that De Ligt would be open to that move to Old Trafford.
So it sounds like Bayern are willing to sell him. De Ligt seems like he might be keen to join, and United want him. Hopefully, we can just get all these pieces together. But it really, like you said, since the Branthwaite offer was rejected, we've seen this sort of rush of United going elsewhere and really trying to get things done quickly, which to me is a bit of a breath of fresh air.
I would just say one thing on that. I would say one thing on that. Yeah, yes, exactly. I think that's the approach United are taking. And you mentioned Frankie de Jong. I mean, I think a load of people still saying his name in their sleep because, I certainly was. The number of times I had to mention him during the transfer window. But with regard to how United want to do their transfers now, with this new structure in place, they don't want to be embroiled in these long-running transfer sagas because it doesn't do the club any good. How many times in the last few seasons have United started a season and they've been undercooked and they haven't got the players that they wanted in? So I think what they're trying to do at the moment, yes, privately they might have a number one target and then they have alternatives. I think what they're trying to do here this time is, right, there's going to be 3 or 4 players in a certain position who fulfills the criteria and the profile of player that we're looking for. And then we're going to try and get a deal done. And whichever is the best deal, that's the player we will go for. So it won't necessarily mean that there is a primary target. Oh, we can't get him. This is a second choice. I don't think it's going to be that kind of approach anymore, because if that was the case, then you'd find United trying to pursue a deal throughout a whole summer like they have done in the past. You had that last summer. I mentioned Frankie de Jong when they chased him and chased, didn't get him, and then the season started, and then you get into a situation probably 2 summers ago. You get into a situation where Casemiro's coming after the season started. They don't want to find themselves in that position again.
No. quite rightly too as well. I mean, it was ridiculous, and then you end up overpaying. You end up getting people who are too old or don't quite fit the system, and you know, both Casemiro and Antony now, who were signed I think in the same week after the season had started, both look as though their United careers are in absolute turmoil. Let alone
and the other thing, Joe, that you
signings.
find is that the selling club will smell desperation as well, and that's why they can charge whatever they want once a season has started, and when they know that Manchester United haven't done the transfer dealings that they would have wanted to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving on from De Ligt a little bit, who is one player where you look at him and maybe that move to Bayern, big move that hasn't quite gone the way that people thought it might. He's not been quite the success there that people would have hoped. Another player on a sort of similar trajectory, maybe this is a new policy that United are exploring, is Ugarte at PSG, someone who made a big move. It was 60 million euros I think they spent on him. Hugely promising young player from Sporting Lisbon as he was at the time. Now 12 months on, United kind of sniffing around, looking at making a deal for this guy. What's your understanding of the latest on that deal? And is this getting people in maybe after they've had a deal that didn't quite work out for a cheaper fee? Is that something United are doing on purpose, do you think?
I don't think so. I don't think so, because sometimes players don't work out at clubs. It doesn't necessarily make them a bad player. They might have brought in Ugarte and thinking, right, we want to play him in this position. Perhaps it hasn't worked out for him in the system and in the position that Bayern Munich wanted. Whereas United will have done due diligence on a number of midfielders and thought, actually, do you know what? This is the actual player that we want, because we've got another player in, for example, Kobbie Mainoo, for example. How do we want to play Kobbie Mainoo in the future? He's like the future of Manchester United. Do we want him to become that guy who's going to be the box-to-box player and let someone else do the dirty work behind him, if you like? And maybe if they've seen someone like Ugarte and thought, you know what, for the price that he could probably be available for, this could be the perfect fit for Manchester United. It may not have worked out at Paris Saint-Germain, but who's to say it wouldn't work out at Manchester United? What we do know is that the initial contacts have been made between the two clubs, where rather like the De Ligt deal, United are exploring the conditions of a potential deal. There's definitely a huge interest in the player. Having said that, and as I mentioned before, there will be other players in that position that Manchester United will be looking at. So I think there's lots of various reports on players like De Ligt and Ugarte, and one report will say it's as good as done. Another report will say it's close to being done. The information that I've got on both is that there has been initial contact between the clubs on both deals, but it's at its early stages at the moment, because United will be looking around to find what the best deal would be. So, of course, Paris Saint-Germain, if they are willing to sell, they would obviously have a valuation for the player, and that would be the start of the negotiation. United then will come in, and they obviously wouldn't come in rather like De Ligt straight in with the valuation of the club, but try and negotiate a price. So it won't be as easy as, right, we're interested, they've got their price, let's stick the money down and bring him in to Man United. But I do still believe that United will want to do, you know, the majority of their business as soon as possible, because they don't want to find themselves in that position where they're scrambling around towards the end of the window. Yeah,
that position we found ourselves in, like you said, too often in recent years. Was it Cavani and Diallo and who else was it? Pellistri that we all signed in the last week of a window as well. I think Cavani was the last day, wasn't it?
It happens. I mean, even in last summer's transfer window as well, there was 2 or 3, I think, that came in on the final day or effectively announced. You had the goalkeeper coming in, Altay Biyindi. You had Sofyan Amrabat coming in on deadline day. And just on Sofyan Amrabat as well, that is still under discussion, because if you remember, on deadline day last summer, United brought him in on loan from Fiorentina. That loan came with an option to buy for 20 million euros plus 5 million euros in performance-related add-ons. Okay. Now, up until about 5 games before the end of the season, I think every United fan was effectively saying, well, they're obviously not going to take up the option. Now, he did play towards the end of the season. He did start the FA Cup final, and, you know, he was praised a little bit by certain fans who were saying, actually, this is the player that Manchester United thought they were getting at the end of last summer. And with that all in mind, United actually haven't made a decision yet on whether they're going to exercise that option. That is still on the table. They don't need to do it immediately. That is still there. So I think discussions are going on internally about whether they will exercise that option on Amrabat or not. It's not as simple as, right, they're sending him back, because they're still thinking about it.
Interesting. Yeah, it's like the sort of keeping, like you said, you've got multiple centre-back options, and we'll go from 1 to 1 to 1. We've got multiple midfield options, and we'll go between them. We sort of know a bit more about Amrabat. We know his strengths, but we also, unfortunately, know a lot of his weaknesses as well. And like you said, for the first sort of 7 or 8 months of the season, it would have been, it's not quite worked out. And then all of a sudden you have play well against, was it Newcastle, Brighton and City at the end of the season. And now, a lot of fans would take him. Moving on to another player United have been linked with over the last couple of weeks, Joshua Zirkzee, the 23-year-old Bologna attacker. Someone else who's been it feels like United are doing a lot of deals all at once here, or certainly going for a lot of deals all at once. Again, Florian Plettenberg, another one of your colleagues, tweeted this morning about there being personal contact between Ten Hag and Joshua Zirkzee over the last few days. It's an odd one, this, because on the one hand, he's got this buyout clause, so you sort of know roughly what we have to pay, or supposedly what we have to pay. But there's talks of him wanting to go to AC Milan. He's focusing on the Euros. It seems like it should be more straightforward, and yet it almost seems more complex, this deal.
Look, normally the difficult part is often between the clubs, because, like I said before, with the De Ligt situation, United probably wouldn't be approaching Bayern Munich if they weren't getting some sort of indication that the player wanted to join. The Zirkzee situation is slightly different, because United know they can talk to Zirkzee and his representatives if they meet that release clause. Now, they have made it clear to Bologna that they will meet that 40 million euro release clause, which is around 34 million pounds. They've continued what I've been told are positive talks and progressive talks with Joshua Zirkzee's representatives. This is where the difficulty is going to be, because it's not as simple as, right, we'll just sort the personal terms out, because United are still in talks with these representatives. And if you add on to that, you mentioned he's at the Euros, of course, but also the fact that there is other interest in the player as well. Like AC Milan, it looked like that could have been a done deal earlier on in the summer. That didn't materialize in time. So now United probably have seen that opportunity whereby they feel potentially that they can sign Joshua Zirkzee. This is still in motion, this one. This one is someone that Manchester United do want to sign. We do know that they want to bring in a forward player to not only compete with Rasmus Højlund, but to complement and help Rasmus Højlund as well, because he was effectively left out on his own, not only on the pitch, but when the window closed, he was effectively the only striker that United could call upon because of all the injuries and the situation with Anthony Martial as well. So Zirkzee is definitely a big target for Manchester United. Talks, as far as I'm aware, and the information we're getting, is that they are continuing with his representatives. It will not be the issue of the release clause. That is the least of United's worries. That will get sorted. The club-to-club bit, they don't need to speak to Bologna, because they will meet that release clause. It's just going to be whether they can agree the personal terms, whether it will fit in to the structure, whether all of the other contractual details can be sorted with his representatives as well. The Bologna vice president, though, has been quoted this week as saying that Zirkzee 99% will be leaving in this transfer window. I love it when, it happens with European clubs more so than in the Premier League, when owners and presidents of European clubs, they seem to speak more than the managers and the players sometimes. And you're always hearing quotes from all of these, particularly Italian clubs and Spanish clubs as well, when they describe what's going on with a transfer. For them to come out and effectively say that Zirkzee is going to leave, now it's a question of where is he going to go. United definitely in the mix.
Yeah, interesting that, isn't it? I mean, obviously, AC Milan are a good team, and I think they've been in and around challenging again the last few seasons, haven't they? They won the league a couple of years ago. But you would think that hopefully United can sway him with maybe a bit more money or whatever. But it's one of those questions: are we getting a player there who doesn't really want to be here? I think United need to really analyse that and make sure we're not getting him just because he's cheap, rather than because he's desperate to play for United. He wants to prove himself. We've had that situation
once again, what I would say, once United have made it clear that they're going to meet the release clause, because we know that talks are ongoing with the representatives, that would indicate that the player could be open to the move. There wouldn't be any talks if, this one is simple. This one is simple because it's the release clause gets you the opportunity to talk to the representatives. Once that release clause is expected to be met and you can talk to the representatives, immediately the representatives and the player could say, actually, I don't want to go there. So you can move on. But they're engaging in these talks. So there must be some part of, the Zirkzee camp and the player himself that would be definitely open to this move.
That's a good point. I'm glad about that. Just on the sort of bigger picture stuff, Dan Ashworth was sort of announced yesterday in a joint statement with Newcastle that he will be joining Manchester United as sporting director, starting immediately, which I think not a lot of people expected until that news broke. It was some people talking after the summer, some people were talking about the new year even before we could get Dan Ashworth in. That has now happened. How does him coming in affect this summer transfer window? And obviously, we can't sit here and say he's already been working because, that would be breaching of contracts. But will him officially starting radically change things? Or do you think United already had an idea of maybe who he was keen on?
United will have been doing work before Dan Ashworth came into the role. And yes, there was that worry that it could have dragged on and on and on. But I think Newcastle's financial situation might have helped out Manchester United in this case. And I think, there was all this talk about £20 million plus compensation. United were never going to pay that. We don't officially know how much the compensation was agreed upon, but United just held firm. And, it's refreshing to hear when you think about certain dealings that have happened for players and recruiting in the recruitment team in the past, for them to be so precise since Ineos have come in. That was the biggest challenge that Ineos faced, because of everything that had happened before. The Glazers effectively admitting that they'd got it wrong by handing all the football operations to Ineos, and straight away they had a plan. They've only been there a few months, and yet they've recruited the chief executive for Manchester City, who will start officially in less than 2 weeks' time. They've recruited Jason Wilcox, who's got a very good reputation as technical director, and they always had it in mind to bring in Dan Ashworth. Now, once he'd gone on gardening leave, we knew that was going to be a case of when and not if that was going to happen. But it was always the worry that it was going to drag on. For it to happen now, when it's with still 2 months of this transfer window to go, it can only be a positive for Manchester United. But make no mistake, they will have done work behind the scenes with the recruitment team and the staff that are already there and who can work. So Dan Ashworth will now come in, and as I mentioned before, it feels like a more targeted approach now to transfers. They don't want to mess around. They will go for players, they will have prices in mind, and if they can't compromise or they can't negotiate on certain prices or they're not willing to, they will move on and they'll move on to other targets. That's what effectively United have been criticised for in the past, simply because they haven't really had people of this stature in those positions before. So now you've got a structure that looks like it's comparable to the other big clubs in the Premier League and in European football, but it just feels like, why hadn't this happened years ago? And now it has happened. It's like suddenly United fans are thinking, wow, this is brilliant. Whereas there's a bit of catching up to do, because a lot of other clubs have already had this structure in place for a long time. And I think, was it Sir Jim Ratcliffe was effectively saying, 3 years before, they're properly challenging, it's probably, right, but, a little bit optimistic as well, if you look at the situation at United and how much work needs to be done. But I think you're going to find now a much more targeted approach and much more a squad, let's say, that's going to look like it's much more balanced than it is now.
It's a little bit embarrassing, really, where we've had to come from in these last few months, isn't it? Of how different and much poorer the United structure was compared to pretty much every other rival around them. And we're getting these people in, and like you said there, the idea of going for a player, if their parent club wants a fee that's too big, we go to another player. That shouldn't be a new concept. We should have, this idea that we always end up in the last week spending loads of money on people because we're nervous and we're desperate. that shouldn't have been the model. And I mean, I guess it wasn't the model, but it certainly was what ended up happening quite a lot.
And what will happen as well, sorry to interrupt you, Joe, what will happen there as well is there will be this switch in how they approach transfers, which is pretty obvious in that it will be driven now by that recruitment team. It will be driven by the chief executive, the technical director, and the sporting director. That's not to say Erik ten Hag won't have a say. It will be a team effort. But it just feels like since Sir Alex Ferguson left, and including Sir Alex Ferguson as well, but that was an anomaly, really, because he was unique. And he and David Gill effectively ran the club. And that's what United thought how a football club should be run. And they continue to bring in manager after manager who wanted their own players. Whereas this time, if they're bringing in players, it is going to be driven by Barada, by Ashworth, by Wilcox, in conjunction with Erik ten Hag. And then once you've got the recruitment right, if the manager doesn't work then, and you need to replace the manager, it's not going to require a huge overhaul of the squad, which is what it has felt like every time a new manager has come in.
Yeah.
Because instead it will work the other way around. Because as we've said numerous times on here, Joe, it is so much easier to replace a manager than 10 players who are on 150, 200 grand a week.
Yeah, unfortunately, but yeah, it obviously is. Christopher Vivell, another one who's just been added to that as a sort of short-term recruitment help for the summer window. I don't know if that's going to be extended afterwards, but worth mentioning that looks like he's going to be coming in as well as a new head of recruitment for the summer window for Manchester United. Just looking at some of the sort of outgoings or potential outgoings, two players in particular who are set to return to Manchester United are Jadon Sancho and Mason Greenwood. Now, I want to start with Mason Greenwood because obviously that's the much more complex situation. He's reportedly back for training in 6 days' time. I think it's next Monday that the players are due to be back. Mason Greenwood hasn't trained or been part of Manchester United's squad since being suspended in January 2022. Is the expectation that he will just come back in? Is it that, obviously United are looking to maybe get him out on loan or to sell him, but sort of shorter term, is he going to just turn up in 6 days' time and go, oh, all right, guys, I'm back? Or, what's going on there?
That's a good question. I mean, they are obviously listening to offers for Mason Greenwood. There's been a number of offers from Spain and in Italy as well. I think the latest was Lazio in talks. There are a number of clubs who are in talks with Manchester United over a potential deal. United obviously want to maximise the amount of money that they can make on Mason Greenwood. It will go down as pure profit, of course, because he came through the academy at Manchester United. It will just be interesting to see when he is due back for training, what United's approach would be. Because if, as we expect, he won't play for Manchester United again, will they take that step of just saying you can use the facilities, you can keep yourself fit, but you're not part of the first team squad? It could be one of those situations, unless there's an absolute humongous U-turn and they decide, actually, you could be part of the plans, which we're not foreseeing at all at the moment.
Yeah, it's just a really odd one because, like I said, unless they sort of re-suspend him again for, obviously we all know what happened there, he's just going to sort of come back in and be training. Obviously, like you said, maybe they'll do something about that, but we'll have to wait and see. Jadon Sancho is himself wasn't training with the first team. Obviously, the situation there is much more of one that we see every day in football. Falling out with the manager, the club want to get rid of him. Are there any suitors there? Borussia Dortmund fancy him but ain't got any money. Is there anyone who's going to take Jadon Sancho?
Dortmund and Juventus still in talks with United.
Okay.
I'm told they're two of multiple clubs in Italy and Germany, rather like with Mason Greenwood, that are interested in Jadon Sancho. United, we understand, have made it clear that £40 million would be the valuation. But as yet, no club has got near that £40 million figure that United would be after. And again, if and when he comes back to training, is it going to be a situation where you can use the facilities but you're going to train away from the squad? Because with both of them, it's clear at the moment anyway, unless there's a huge turnaround, that they've played their last games for the club, so they will be looking for good deals and obviously where the players would want to go as well. So those two, I think United will want to generate money from as soon as possible, so that they can use that money potentially for their other targets.
Yeah, because they're both, like Jadon Sancho, like I said, was training with the reserves, not allowed to eat with the first team. Are they going to sort of reignite that switch and, make him go off again, or will he come back to the first? It's all up in the air, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Just another player that's obviously been linked a lot is Wan-Bissaka. There was talks of a move to Everton, talks of a move to Fenerbahce. You this morning have spoken about a potential move to West Ham as well. He's into the last year of his contract now, so obviously the amount of money United could get would be pretty slim. Do you think that Wan-Bissaka is going to be leaving Man United? Because it looked as though that area was almost sort of sorted, didn't it? You got Dalot and Wan-Bissaka as the backup, but now it looks like he may be going.
So United aren't actively looking to sell Arran Wan-Bissaka, but simply because of the terms of his contract and where he is with his contract, they're having to look at other right backs in case they get an offer for Wan-Bissaka that they think it's probably the right time to accept this offer. West Ham are one of a number of clubs who have shown an interest in Wan-Bissaka. West Ham, though, are looking at a number of other right backs as well, so the price would probably have to be right. And I think the information I'm getting, particularly from the West Ham side, noises from that side, would suggest that it's a little bit quiet on that front at the moment, but it could be something that they would properly revisit later on in the window. And it's one of those situations where clubs will know about a player's contract situation, and the later they leave it in the window, while the player hasn't signed a new deal, the better deal they could probably get. As it stands, there are no talks ongoing currently with Arran Wan-Bissaka and Manchester United over a new contract. So he's now entered that final year. He's like 6 months away from being able to talk to clubs outside England, and then 12 months away from being able to join any club for no money at all. I don't think United want to find themselves in that situation. So if a suitable offer was to come in, I think United would look at it, and then they would have to then trigger some of the work that they've done on right backs, because what we've been saying throughout the window, centre-back, midfield and a forward seem to be the three priority positions. The right-back area could start moving up that list depending on what happens with Wan-Bissaka.
Yeah, it's interesting, that one, isn't it? And like I said, no contract talks yet, and typically clubs don't let players get into the optional extension year before they start making those talks, do they? Does that suggest to you that United are willing to let him leave for free next summer, or is it just, maybe they're leaving it a bit later to start these talks?
He and Lindelof are in the same position.
Yeah.
There are no talks over a new contract at the moment, and they would have to start, considering these offers. They don't want to be in a position where they're going for free next summer, because if you add on to that, if they're not going to keep them, United want to start afresh now, don't they? They want to start building for their long-term future, effectively. So if Lindelof and Wan-Bissaka are still at the club with only 1 year left and they know they're going to leave, what impact is that going to have on potential incomings for this summer's transfer window? Because, they'll be on big wages. You could take their wages off the bill. You could get transfer fees in now and then recruit in the right back area, and maybe even bring in 2 central defenders, because Varane has left. If Lindelof was to leave, there's 2. There's talks over Johnny Evans and a new 1 year deal, which we're still waiting to find out what the outcome of that is going to be. But you wouldn't expect Johnny Evans to be one of the first 2 choices or even first 3 choices. So and then you've got a situation that United are thinking, do we need to bring in 2 central defenders? And what kind of profile of central defender do we need to bring in? A Matthijs De Ligt, who's been there, done it, got lots of experience, but is young enough to still have a high ceiling. And then do we bring in another young central defender who's going to be learning from all these players? You've obviously got Willy Kambwala there as well, who made a few appearances last season, who's always going to be learning from the players that are there. And then hopefully, for United's sake, they'll be hoping that Lisandro Martinez can stay injury free. So all of these factors will come into play. But I don't think United will want to be in a position where players that they have spent big money on, was like 50 million for Wan-Bissaka from Crystal Palace and it's probably around 30 million, I think, if I remember correctly, for Victor Lindelof.
Yep.
They don't want that kind of amount of player and value of player going for no money at all next summer. Of course, they're not going to get that much money for them this time, but they will want to recoup some of it.
Yeah, it's better than nothing as well, isn't it? And I think with Lindelof, I think he's signed an extension, hasn't he, since he's been there? So he's presumably been given a pay rise from the guy that we signed those years ago. You could replace him with someone like you mentioned on less money. And Wan-Bissaka, 50 million. I mean, he's been good, but I forgot it was that much. You've just reminded me that it was 50 for him and 80 for Maguire, wasn't it, that same summer? That was quite a big outlay there. That's all. Thank you, Dharmesh. You've answered all my questions. We know what's going on. We know the latest at Man United. It's good that there's actually stuff happening, though, isn't it? United are working on 2, 3, maybe even 4 if you include some of the outs, transfers all at once, which seems to be a departure from seasons gone by where it's been, let's do this one, and then we do this one, and then we do this one. We're actually got enough people, enough competent people to go for multiple things at once. I'm really excited, personally.
Well, yeah, I can calm it down a little bit, but yeah.
All right, those are my words, not yours. I'll accept that, but I'm excited anyway. Right, Dharmesh, thank you for coming on. That has been Dharmesh Sheth, reporter from Sky Sports News. Thank you very much for joining us. Hit subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you in a bit.